Support for This News is So Gay comes from the LGBTQ Opportunity Fund of the Cleveland Foundation, leveraging philanthropy to empower LGBTQ communities. Welcome to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck, editor of the Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ newsroom. Thanks so much for joining us. We interrupt your regularly scheduled LGBTQ Reporters Roundtable to bring you a special edition of our podcast. This is Extra Extra.
Read all about it.
Extra Extra is an opportunity to hear more from the LGBTQ journalists who have helped define our field and continue to shape possibilities for other LGBTQ journalists. And I can think of no better first guest for Extra Extra than Tracy Baim. Tracy co-founded Windy City Times in 1985. The Windy City Times, of course, Chicago's now legendary LGBTQ paper of record. She has worked 41 years in local LGBTQ media, I assume since she was 10. So I'll just put that out there right there. She is the author of Gay Press, Gay Power, The Growth of LGBT Newspapers in America, a comprehensive look back at LGBTQ media. She's written 13 other books on LGBTQ history. She has deservedly won, I believe, every award conceivable out there, including induction into the Chicago Gay and Lesbian Hall of Fame and induction into the Hall of Fame for the Association of LGBTQ Journalists. She now serves as the executive director of Press Forward Chicago and helped spearhead the LGBTQ Media Mapping Project, which we are going to talk all about. And she's here with me right now. Tracy Baim, welcome to This News is So Gay.
Thanks for having me, Ken. I'm so excited about your show.
I don't have time to ask you any questions because that was your entire bio. It took the whole show, and I cut so much out, Tracy Baim. But let's get to some questions. A born and bred Chicagoan?
Yes, absolutely. I only left for college and came running back right after I graduated. I went to Des Moines, Iowa for college at Drake University.
When little Tracy Baim was running around Chicago, was journalism the goal?
Oh, man, was it ever. You joked about me starting at age 10. I did start at age 10. I had a consumer column in the Chicago Defender because my mom was managing editor in the 70s at the Chicago Daily Defender. I would go down with her to the plant in Cal City and help do layout. So I have always wanted to be a journalist. My mom was a journalist in the mainstream and then alternative, and then my stepfather was at the Chicago Tribune for 29 years. So I've got it in my blood and environment.
So many journalists talk about their coming out process of when they had to break it to their families that they wanted to be a journalist. It sounds like you did not have that experience.
Oh, not at all. It was more the coming out that was just, they were very accepting, but it took a little bit for me to get there. But no, the journalism part, my sister and brother didn't go into that, but there was never a time that I remember that I didn't want to be a journalist. I used to geek out about typefaces and fonts, and I took print shop in high school. I mean, every aspect of journalism always interested me.
What really sold the deal for you? Why journalism?
Well, I don't know if there was a moment in time, but I even started a grammar school newspaper at Walt Disney Grammar School. Like telling people stories, getting information out to people always felt so rewarding to me. I mean, even in a fun way. Like not only did I help start the Disney newsletter, but at the same time, my friends started a Transylvania Times publication at our grammar school. We were vampires and wolves. So just getting information out to people and sharing stories. I never did a lot of opinion writing. Even in my family newsletter that I did for our family and neighborhood, it was all about what was going on with the neighbors and my sister and brother and our grades and sports and all that kind of stuff. It really was. And I would even do fake ads and all sorts of things. So I don't know what it was that compelled me. I definitely feel like it was in my blood and environment. My mom's father worked for, maybe even helped start Stars and Stripes in World War I. He covered sports. So there was just a lot of that. My stepfather's father was a printer. My birth father is a photographer. So really, I just had all this kind of documenting around me and felt compelled to do that myself.
Amazing. I struggle sometimes to explain to people what it took to start an LGBTQ publication, and we started the Buckeye Flame in 2020. 1985, can you just set the scene for us? How do you even begin to explain to folks what the climate was at that time?
So I had started in 1984, right out of college, being openly gay. I was told I couldn't work in the mainstream, but luckily my mother had heard about Gay Life newspaper, which was owned by a guy named Chuck Renslow, founder of International Mr. Leather. So I went in and did a job interview next to the Man's Country Bathhouse with Chuck Renslow and his crew, and I immediately my eyes went to the typesetting machine, and I said I can run that because I had learned how to run typesetting machines in high school, actually, and paid my way through college operating them and training the older generation of typists. So I started at Gay Life part-time and then was up to managing editor within a year because the attrition in the gay press was legend. Basically, most of the advertising was bars and businesses, some lawyers, professionals that were out, but it was always struggling financially and also for acceptance. People didn't use their real names when they wrote for the paper, although we're going back to that now. I didn't even know some people were using fake names until they would leave the job and then tell me their real name for the references they might get. And the gay papers used kind of generic names like Century Publications or generic names so you could put that on your resume and not say that you worked at a gay paper. So very few people that wanted a real journalism career worked in the gay press with their real names or at all because of the risks that they took. And yet you couldn't really be openly gay and be in the mainstream. So it was a very difficult time for the individual journalists and then also for the gay media. But at the same time, gay media was thriving, especially in the post-Stonewall universe. That's when in the 1970s, all these publications started up. There's really two reasons for that. One is a lot of gay folks had been trained in the kind of social justice world about alternative media, whether that was alt weeklies or the black press, et cetera. But also the tools to produce newspapers became so much more accessible by the late 70s and 80s. The typesetting equipment versus the linotype machines, the printing possibilities. So as the prices came down and the ability to do it there's more agility to that. I think that's why a lot of alternative types of publications flourished starting in the 1970s.
There was a lot going on for the LGBTQ plus community in the mid 80s. How do you even set out an editorial philosophy of covering everything that was happening?
Well, it's interesting because, there was never, ever an issue where we didn't have to cut a lot of stuff. And until the mid 90s, we didn't have the internet as a place to offload all that extra content. So choices about what to go in was always tough. And my mission was always to make sure there was a balance across multiple issues, meaning we couldn't get every community represented in every issue of the physical weekly print paper. But over the course of a month, you would make sure you had stories about the lesbian community, the bisexual community, the trans community, which was very small back then, and certainly the various communities within Chicago, so the African American, the Asian, Latino. And I was very conscious of that. I often had resistance when I had white gay male bosses, but that ended by 87 when I was in charge and top of the masthead. Some people always said I was trying to cram too much in, and I am guilty of that. I tried to get a wide range of things about our community in. Eventually, we created publications called Black Lines and En La Vida. They were monthlies that lasted several years in order to kind of have another place to have more content for those communities, by and for those communities. They were written by and for those communities. So to me, always the difficult choice was what couldn't fit, because we were trying to cover such a wide range of things. And like you said, in the mid 80s, really for Chicago, that's when HIV/AIDS really started to build its momentum, and the losses were adding up. And so we were trying to learn from the coasts and covering that. And the gay rights push in Chicago was also reaching its pinnacle. We got gay rights bill in Chicago by the late 80s. So that decade was incredible. The most significant event was the 1987 March on Washington. That was a few months after I started my other publication, Outlines, and our whole crew went. And it was just, for me, the most motivating event you could have ever wanted as a young journalist at 24 years old, to be able to be with a million other queer people There were dozens and dozens of events I got to. I don't know how I did all of the things that we were able to do during that weekend, from the Supreme Court protest to the Names Project quilt to the actual march. Unbelievable experience covering our community and motivating our community, not just obviously the journalists, but everybody that went back home to their towns to build a movement.
One of the things that I've gotten better at, but I'm not quite probably where I need to be, is that personal versus professional, right? I'll be covering an article, I'll be covering an anti-LGBTQ plus representative here in Ohio saying horrible, horrible things about the community. And I will still have that moment of like, oh no, he's talking about me and it affects me deeply. Talk to us about how you've navigated being a thing apart, or maybe investing yourself in that journalism to keep some sort of balance there. By the way, in particular, I can't even wrap my mind around doing LGBTQ plus journalism around HIV and AIDS during that time. I don't know how I would even navigate that.
Oh yeah, it was. I mean, the things that people said about people deserving to die and all that kind of stuff were really horrendous. I remember in particular a moment outside Chicago City Hall when there was work on the gay rights bill. There was this anti-gay Reverend Hiram Crawford, who was a very tall, imposing guy, but a little whacked, and he was always there protesting with his crew. And he was at one point, I was, interviewing him, and I was looking up, probably about a foot and a half, and he was just spewing all of this real hate towards me, right? And the community I was trying to cover. And I think in many ways, what I was able to do in the 80s was to almost see the future in what I was doing. I was like, it is so important to document everything that is being said in this war that nobody believes there's a war about. HIV/AIDS, this onslaught of anti-gay discrimination and violence. Like, I was able to have an out-of-body reporter experience so many times where I was like, ooh, this is so important to get down. I am so glad I'm here taking pictures. This is not, to me, it was not personal to me. These people didn't know me. Let me just say, your family hurts you more than your community, than the outside world does. And when I say family, I mean gay family. I have been hurt and burned more within the LGBTQ movement in a more personal way that hurt me more than the external world ever has. And that's where that internal homophobia, transphobia, and stuff that our community has can be the most damaging. So I was able to really have a solid armor against that external world. And I built up over time one to my internal community that could often be very frustrating. I didn't leave that movement to work on animal rights or racial justice, in part because I knew I would face that in any movement, that you're going to have people that are critical and mean and just internally destructive. And so you can't let them get to you either. But I'm not saying that's easy. It still can hurt.
My hero has always been Randy Schiltz, and in particular, telling truth to the LGBTQ community and advocating for closures of the bathhouses during a time when the gay community said, no, we absolutely don't want that. You're a traitor. And you just referenced that internal family, our LGBTQ family, and that pushback. That's been hard for me to navigate. What advice do you have?
Well, in Randy, I didn't agree with the bathhouse thing because that was the number one place to educate people. But that doesn't mean I don't respect all of the work he did. I think someone like Andrew Sullivan makes it really hard, and all these white gay guys that are in the Trump administration, it makes it very hard to see the big picture in our movement. But I know that the vast majority of our community is good on the issues of trans rights. Like, we haven't allowed a lot of that anti-trans stuff that's poisoning England right now to fester here, although it does exist. And a lot of our anti-gay folks out there are using trans stuff to try to divide our community. I wish sometimes our community was a little bit more aware of how it gets pitted against one another. Like, I think there's a lot of naivete about that. A lot of this is not coming naturally. People are getting paid to try to destroy communities, not just the gay community, but the African American community, et cetera. So it bothers me immensely when we have people like Andrew Sullivan that are just so hateful to parts of our community and has the platform to do destructive things. It's why I am advocate for LGBTQ media so much across the country, because we must have many voices. We can't let one try to be the dictator of our movement. It's also why our movement has not been as vulnerable as maybe some other communities that have been more leader focused. We have always had many, many, many people that could be spokespeople and lead our movement. You can't take one out. By killing Harvey Milk, you did not kill our movement. In fact, you embolden it to be even stronger.
There's an organization here in Ohio called the Ohio Legislative Correspondents Association, and you have to be a member of OLCA in order to get into certain press conferences in the Ohio State House. And last year, the Buckeye Flame applied for membership, and we were pretty soundly rejected, and they came back to us and said, "You are activists, not journalists." Talk to me about relationships with legacy publications, with straight publications, and getting the respect that you so deserve.
Oh, that took at least 20 years. What's funny about that activist journalist thing is it's so insane, right? Like every single person that is a journalist has opinions, and they are from a community, many communities, right? Religious or not, and tall or short, or white or black or whatever, right? We all have something that we bring with us to this work. And the irony for me was that mainstream media was always cribbing off Windy City Times for stories, calling me at 10 o'clock at night I got calls this week for Gay History Month, right? I have been in their virtual Rolodexes for 41 years for sources, right? But I'm about 20 years in, and I'm not kidding, it probably took about 20 years into my career. I started to get respect from the individual journalists that knew I had been there for so long, and started to get recognition, started to get asked to do talks. And one talk in particular at the Association of Women Journalists in the early part of this century, I talked about alternative is the new mainstream. I felt like, in the last 20 years that finally people started to respect alternative media. And I mean alternative media, not just in the Chicago Reader sense, but in the Black press, the Chinese press, the Korean press, the Polish Times, that people started to understand that the mainstream was never doing a good job at covering comprehensively communities. But as hundreds and hundreds of people lost their jobs in journalism at the mainstream outlets, these other alternative publications started to be more respected, and the individuals within them. So I did feel a turn about halfway through my career. Luckily, by then, I didn't feel a need for outside validation. So it felt good, but I didn't need it. I was already ready to be this rogue outside activist journalist for my whole career because I didn't care. I saw lots of people lose their jobs that were allegedly not activist journalists. So I'm glad that I had this path that was harder, because it made me last 41 years in the career I always wanted to do, despite the fact that in journalism school, I was told it wasn't really possible. So I set out to prove them wrong, and their paternalism wrong. And they eventually, even my dean contacted me years later and said how much he respected me for having chosen my own path. But it isn't easy, Ken. What you're doing in Ohio is probably reminiscent of Illinois in the 80s, right? You have some really difficult roads. Mark Siegel in Philadelphia took a long time for him to get that respect from the Pennsylvania Associations for Media. So I wish you well in that. And in many ways, once you get that validation, you won't need it. Like, it'll be at a point where you're like, you know what, we succeeded without you. I'm bringing something to you. You don't bring anything to me.
This has officially crossed over from podcast for the masses to Ken's therapy. So thank you for that, Tracy. Again, everyone, you are listening to This News is So Gay. I'm your host, Ken Schneck, editor of The Buckeye Flame, Ohio's LGBTQ plus newsroom. And I am here with LGBTQ plus journalism legend, and I hope you're comfortable with that word because it is true, Tracy Baim, for our special edition Extra Extra. For folks who don't know about Press Forward, tell everyone about Press Forward.
So Press Forward is about a 2-year-old initiative launched by MacArthur Foundation and the Knight Foundation out of Florida to focus on local news sustainability. There is a national Press Forward whose mission is still local, and then there are almost 40 Press Forward chapters around the country. They are all independent and self-run, and mine is based at the Chicago Community Trust. So a bunch of funders in Chicago plus some national helped stand up Press Forward Chicago I started in January of this year, and it's got about 3 years left. Our goal is to innovate, certainly directly fund community outlets, independent outlets, but also to innovate on shared services. So we will be leaning heavily into the survey results we got from asking media what they need to be more sustainable. That includes advertising supports, demographics, grant writing, audience growth, and a bunch of other back-end supports where we can jointly work together to make this system more sustainable and create coalitions that last beyond Press Forward's lifespan.
Well, you got me an advanced copy, which is now available to everyone. I don't know if I'm supposed to be outing you like that, but I just did, of the LGBTQ plus Media Mapping Project. I am obsessed with it. I have approximately 62 questions. I will only be asking you maybe one or two, but it is so fascinating. I think that there's a lot of conversations out there about being an LGBTQ plus journalist, but there's not a ton of info out there before this about LGBTQ plus newsrooms, and that is an altogether different experience. What was the motivation for putting this together?
So about 2 years ago, I was in the News is Out collaborative. Windy City Times is in the News is Out collaborative based at Local Media Association. And I realized one of the big barriers we had in going after funding and advertising was that there wasn't a lot of good current data or really old data analyzing in depth the strength of these newsrooms and where they are. So before I even got this job at Press Forward, MacArthur Foundation funded this project last year. So I was working on it parallel to my work with Press Forward Chicago, but it will have beneficial effects to being able to inform the other Press Forward chapters around the country about LGBT media that might be in their footprint. So we are hoping the launch next week will lead to a next phase, which will be taking the recommendations from the report and seeing what the capacity might be for the philanthropy world and the corporate world to add supports to LGBTQ media. It will not take much to shore up and strengthen and maybe even expand into the 18 states without LGBTQ media to have more resources out there. So the goal with this is to try to educate the philanthropy community, maybe the corporate world when it gets its senses back about DEI, and to put more resources into this because we need authentic voices from all types of communities writing about their own communities. And the LGBT media is no different than that. It's just been kind of ignored because it is smaller. It is, I feel, the next space where philanthropy needs to look because it's been doing a decent job with other niches. It needs to do more, but it also should be in the LGBTQ space because we've seen the backlash, right? Some foundations declared gay rights victory a few years ago, a little short-sighted, because now we're back in the thick of it, where people's lives literally are in danger and people are crossing state lines to get healthcare or even to move their families into safety. People are leaving this country for safety. So my feeling is the report is extremely timely, but we need to figure out how we can activate some of the recommendations right out of the media's mouths, right? Like we asked lots of questions. We did both focus groups and surveys so that we could get a full picture of local media. In addition, there's a section on national LGBT media as well. But the main focus has been local media and the map. We will add to the map as media come on board, and we will sadly remove folks as media close. We are at a real pivot point for so much media in this country, including LGBTQ press.
What surprised you most? What were some of those data points where you said, oh, okay, didn't see that coming?
Well, first of all, I was shocked that a significant portion of these outlets operate under $100,000 a year, which means they're volunteer efforts, basically. And yet they're doing incredible work, right? The vast majority are for-profit still, and we shouldn't force a nonprofit model on them if possible, because just like with the Black press, we talk about generational wealth, we talk about independence from the government, and being nonprofit can have some of its problems. So we shouldn't force a business model if an outlet doesn't want it. But so those two things for sure. But even in the national LGBT press, those who participated in the survey were also pretty small for their grand notion of being national. They are also operating, many of them, at much less budgets than they used to have. So we have lots of weaknesses. There are definitely strengths, and I've loved the kind of rural outlets. I mean, certainly Buckeye Flame is one of those that's a bright, shining star of nonprofit, statewide, LGBTQ media. You are a rare bird, and we need more of those. And then there are other ones operating in North Carolina and other parts of the South that are a little more vulnerable, right? So I think there's a lot to be done, and I'm hoping that this report sparks some change and supports nationally.
I want to be very clear, listeners, when Tracy Baim says we need more examples like the Buckeye Flame, she does not mean in Ohio. Please set up your new publication in another state. Thank you very much. What are some of the recommendations that our listeners can actually act on? I mean, certainly if they have access to a pot of money, that would be a great thing. But are there things that consumers of LGBTQ plus media can do more to support that ecosystem?
Yes, absolutely. And even more and more of them are getting better at small donor abilities. Like, so I would say if take a look at, a few local sites that you have, whether it's your hometown or where you live now, wherever it might be, and even giving $5 a month not only helps the outlet directly, right? They know that's consistent money, but it also shows their funders and their advertisers a dedicated audience. So there's a dual support there. If you don't have money, subscribe to their newsletters because again, these numbers matter. People look at the numbers of people subscribing. So pick a few outlets from the survey, whether it's the Washington Blade because it's got great national coverage out of DC or individual outlets in states you've lived in. Subscribe to them. That's the first base level of support. There are absolutely so many LGBT people in powerful positions in this country, in marketing agencies and PR firms, in philanthropy. So find ways in that you can get involved, either through press forwards or through other means that you can actually move larger money into this. And I would say also academic institutions have a role to play here, especially where there are gay news deserts. Where they can partner with maybe a gay community center or other gay resources to launch a newsletter that can be informative. It may not be traditional journalism, but it's a start when you have nothing in a state for the LGBTQ community.
What's your vision of LGBTQ plus newsrooms working together? Because I think that, right, I do not subscribe to a deficit model. I would love an abundance model, particularly in LGBTQ plus philanthropy. But we also know sometimes you see this, right, in LGBTQ plus nonprofit orgs outside of journalism, where there is this false sense of competition because are we competing for the same funds? And I have definitely already seen that between LGBTQ plus newsrooms. How can we work better together? The very few of us there are.
Yeah, it is very frustrating for me to see this. I was at a conference recently where someone was kind of having a negative input on others that were doing work, right? I was like, that's a deficit mentality, it really is. Because there's so little right now. We all need to work together to grow the pot. I've always had that mentality about pretty much every kind of project I've ever worked on. When I joined the Chicago Reader as publisher, I was like, oh, this is amazing. Let's start a Chicago Independent Media Alliance with 80 outlets together working to advocate for things. Ironically, one of the things we advocated for was a pooled fund for journalism, right? So things that when you work together, you grow the bread. And so it does frustrate me when people think, well, I'm going to put down someone else. Don't put down someone else to get ahead. You will always then be in quicksand. I feel like we are building bridges. Maybe this report is the first step of building a larger bridge. There are many alliances, several alliances of LGBTQ media. There's the one that Rivendell Media has. There's the News is Out at LMA. There's trans alliances. There's a bunch of things that we mentioned in the report, which is great. There's a new lesbian publications alliance. So those are all good. Those alliances should work together to try to advocate for more, whether that's in the corporate advertising world or in the philanthropy. I do think the money is out there now. I think more people understand the desperate need to support local media generally and even individual readers. So how do we work together to make these outlets stronger? Local Media Association, beyond News is Out, has done this with Black publications. They also do financial trainings, right? How do we get more LGBT media into financial trainings? How to do donor advocacy, how to grow their newsletters. There's lots of technical supports that foundations will fund and editorial collaborations, hopefully, that can fund the editorial side. We need both. I know that Lookout Phoenix has been doing a lot of push in that. What needs to happen is it be a two-way street, right? It can't be extractive. We need to make sure any editorial alliances bring resources to those outlets rather than just asking them to be part of it without any money. Based on what we've seen in the desperate financial situation most of these outlets are in, sometimes a collaboration can be too costly. If it's taking half your time, but you're not seeing any financial parts of that, you could collapse your system, right? We have to look at capacity building as part of this growth, or we can't sustain those collaborations for long.
And the biggest takeaway for me from the report was that the future of LGBTQ journalism is apparently this podcast. This news is so gay. So thank you so much for that shout out, Tracy. Unbelievable. When I saw that, I was very happy. That's not exactly what it says, folks. You should check out the report. Let's finish with some advice, and maybe two sets of advice. We have budding queer journalists. First, sell our budding queer journalists just on the field of journalism. And then I'll tip my hand for you. We're going to talk specifically about encouraging them to go to LGBTQ newsrooms. But first, just for young queer journalists, maybe who are thinking, oh gosh, these legacy newsrooms might not be the most friendly. Should I really even go into journalism? What do you have to say to budding queer journalists?
Well, because I came out at a time where I didn't even have a choice to work in the mainstream, I am less enamored with mainstream media because of it, right? Like I respect it. I respected it then, but I knew it was limited. The one thing you have is your reputation and your identity, right? And to me, I don't want to compromise on either. And so I couldn't have fit in the mainstream for long anyway. These days, there is a choice, sort of. In some ways, you have to compromise yourself, though. And so that is something given that the world is entirely shifting by the moment and people have to pay their bills, I wouldn't want to say don't go mainstream if that's the right thing for you. But know that you might make some compromises early, but be able to make up for it later. Don't compromise on your reputation, though. So don't do the things that aren't with your integrity. Even 20 years ago, I was saying to people, journalism is one of the best professions, and it's most comparable to musicians. We don't need a license to do what we do. Now the ways to do it are free. So pick a choice, right? And if you don't want to work in a mainstream outlet and you want to just be doing your own thing, you get a chance to. But you may be like an itinerant musician and not able to do it all the time in all ways you want to, but you can do it. That's the thing. You don't need mainstream validation to be an out queer person and be a great journalist.
Let's continue the musician metaphor. Sell us on working for or playing with a queer band in our field. What about encouraging LGBTQ plus journalists to work for LGBTQ plus newsrooms?
Well, there are so few jobs in LGBTQ newsrooms. It isn't always the best fit. We have racism in our community. We have classism. We have sexism. I didn't always have the greatest times in LGBTQ newsrooms. So you still have to have a thick skin, even if you're in the LGBTQ press. And so I would say don't go in with rose-colored glasses or rainbow-colored glasses. There's definitely going to be things you have to deal with that maybe you will decide to leave because there's not the integrity. When people are operating in a desperate economic situation, compromises do get made in LGBT media too. And you may not always agree with it. So maybe you got to start your own thing sometimes, and a side thing. And then maybe the gay press comes to you and says, hey, you got a great thing going on your TikTok. Let's work together, right? So it's such a weird situation where people can just be journalists anywhere on any platform. Pick a lane, stick to integrity and authenticity, and I believe you will get an audience in one way or the other, whether you're working for an official LGBT media outlet or not. It's really an exciting time, a crazy time, a Wild West time. And in many ways, I feel like it is a replication of in 1984 when I started. It was like, boy, I can just get a typesetting machine and I can do my own thing. And then 2 years later, I could just get a Mac desktop computer and do my own thing. Now I have a phone and I can do my own thing. It's very exciting, scary. We just need more. We just need more coverage no matter where it happens.
I'm canceling my therapy appointment tomorrow. I don't need it anymore. This has provided that for me. We should also remind our listeners this show should not be providing you your official therapy. Tracy Baim, where can our listeners go to learn more about the Mapping Project and all the great things you're doing?
So the Local Media Association will be putting it out first week of September. It'll be on their website as well as linked with CUNY for the map. Press Forward Chicago, you could just search Press Forward Chicago and find our shared services report, which really is exciting to show how media can work together. So both reports, I think, will lead to some supports in some way. It's a long road, but I'm hoping that the foundation world is open to supporting LGBTQ media in different ways than and haven't. It's been so little, and I'm excited about the possibilities.
Tracy Baim, this podcast would not exist. The Buckeye Flame, without question, would not exist but for the path that you have blazed alongside so many other LGBTQ journalists. I can't even begin to thank you for what you've created for the whole ecosystem, for so many individuals, and for everybody who now knows more than they did before about our community because of the space that you provide. Thank you so much for everything that you have done and continue to do.
I really appreciate it, Ken, and I guess I don't need to go to therapy either tomorrow.
Yay, teamwork, teamwork. That was Tracy Baim, everyone. You have been listening to This News is So Gay and our special edition, Extra Extra. If you liked this episode of This News is So Gay, please share it with a friend. Rate and review it on your favorite podcasting app. That really does make a difference. And subscribe so that you do not miss out on our next episode. In the meantime, read LGBTQ+ news, share the stories of LGBTQ+ reporters, and support the work of LGBTQ+ newsrooms. Until next week, friends.